I thought I was the deepest thinking pastry chef in the world until I met Johanna and Charles. So I totally changed what I want to talk about. It's going to be all lighthearted until I met them. And now here comes the guilt. Okay. But I will tell you a great celebrity story before we start, because this is important. I could end the story by saying I went to Salma Hayek's house one Saturday night. That'd be good enough, right? Okay. So I did go to Salma Hayek's house one night. It wasn't a house that she lived in, but she and her husband own it. It's in Bel Air. It used to belong to Vidal Sassoon. If you don't remember who Vidal Sassoon is, he invented the bob haircut and the 5-point haircut and had a bunch of salons and products around the world and teaching academies. And he passed away, and they bought it, and they throw parties there. And so I was told by the boss, go take care of the wedding or the birthday cake for Salma Hayek. So I did. So I'm in the garage. I'm getting ready to cut her birthday cake. I rip the fondant off it, throw it in the trash can. I got a cook next to me that I brought with me. And I brought the chef of the restaurant at the hotel I worked at the time. She was behind me. I'm cutting the birthday cake, and I feel a presence behind me. I look behind me, and there's a gentleman with a beard, and I don't recognize him, and he smiles at me. And there's a woman with him, and she says to me, "Where is that sweet, sugary, spongy stuff?" I said, "You mean the fondant?" And she says, "Yeah, that stuff." I said, "It's in the trash can." Now, I was in the zone, so I turned back around, and I went back to cutting the cake. I look over my shoulder, and I see this woman, like a raccoon in a garbage dumpster, eating the fondant out of the trash can. And so, now I'm disgusted. So I kind of body block her a little bit so she doesn't kind of attack the cake, and I really was being kind of a jerk. So she walks away. I watch her walk away. I look to my cook and I say, "Rosendo, what the F was that?" And he goes, "I don't know, chef." And then I hear behind me Holly Jiven. She says, she was the chef. She said, "Chef, you just dissed Demi Moore." Yes, Demi Moore was eating out of the trash can, everybody. I didn't recognize her. And I'm like, so you got to be nice to everybody, evidently. So, but yes, it was at Salma Hayek's house. So let me tell you how I got to be a chef, because this is important to my story. I had no intent to be a chef. As a kid, I had two ambitions. I was going to play football at the University of Southern California, but I grew up to have this body, so that wouldn't have worked out. And two, I was going to be a firefighter. My dad was a firefighter, his brother was a firefighter, and my cousin was a firefighter. So I thought that was the destination for me. I was going to be an LA County firefighter, and specifically, I was going to be a paramedic rescue man firefighter. But in the 1970s, that all changed. My dad's friend was killed in a fire. My dad was hurt in the fire. And the food stopped because the paycheck stopped. And I remember one night, my mom putting the meals together, and it basically got down to 4 meals. It was either pasta, chipped beef on toast. If you don't know what that is, consider yourself lucky. My mom would put it down in front of us, and she would say, "Your grandfather used to eat that in the trenches of World War I in France," trying to guilt us into eating it. That's how you create a food eating disorder, I should say. Cube steak, and one night we had some strange-looking legs on a plate. They were our pet rabbits. So I can tell you that food insecurity had a big impact on my family. So my mother had me later in life, so all my siblings were much older than I was, or I am, I should say. And my brother Mark went to culinary school in the late 70s, and he came home one weekend when I was about 8 years old, and he was showing me his toolkit. He was showing me all his knives that were issued to him, his Parisian scoop. I remember every moment of it. And he said to me in a very serious tone, he said, "I'm always going to have something to eat now." And I thought, wow, isn't that powerful? If you want food, be around food. And I never forgot about that. Now, my brother Tom wasn't there for that conversation, but he felt the calling to become a chef too. So he went on to culinary school as well. And I barely graduated high school. I did finish second to last in high school. I'm very proud of that. I'm proud of that now. I wasn't proud of it for a very long time, but I'm proud of it now. And I figured since I was going nowhere in life that I would pick up a trade too. So I started cooking as well, but I started out washing dishes in a Chinese restaurant. And then from there, I did the typical thing that cooks did in that generation, how you were brought up. You peeled onions, you peeled potatoes, you peeled garlic. But in a Chinese restaurant, I was making wontons and making egg rolls and in between washing the dishes and that sort of thing. And that kind of ignited my love of food, but I never really fell in love with food. It was just something that I did. I wasn't necessarily passionate about eating it, but I was passionate about performing with it. And to me, it was a performance. It was being able to serve dessert. And as a pastry chef, that you get that moment in your diner's time, that guest time, where you are the final memory of something that they get to eat. And that's really what interested me in that. And so I was lucky that I had a great mentor. I had an opportunity to work for the Ritz-Carlton, and the chef that hired me quit before I started. And his last day of work was my first day of work. So I was like, what the F is going on here? And I was only about 21 or 22 years old. But they'd hired a really great chef. His name is Sylvain Gaillez. And his uncle was the White House pastry chef. That's how I got to cook for President Clinton and many other people at the time. And Sylvain became a great mentor to me. And I'll never forget his first day of work. He took a parchment paper cone, he folded it, he put melted chocolate in it, and he piped on a plate. And it seemed like that was something that I was never going to be able to do. And I looked at him and I said, I can't do that. And he said to me, well, you're going to have to learn to do it because I'm not working down to your ability. You're working up to my ability. And I said, yes, chef. Understood that. Now, I've repeated that line about 2,000 times over the last 35 years to my crew. But it really was that sense that I had to keep up with Sylvain in order to make my way in the business. And every day was a challenge because the learning curve came so fast at me. But he really was an incredible mentor to me. And without incredible mentorship, I wouldn't have met the next two mentors through him, in fact. One was Pascal Janvier, who was a corporate pastry chef for Cocoa Berry before they were Berry Calabo. And then he introduced me to a gelato maestro who really was a life-changing moment for me meeting him. And I'll tell you why. And I'll get back to that in a second, because I do believe that there's no better time to be a pastry chef than right now. You know, right now, even though the cost of chocolate is high and the ingredients are high, there really is no better time. Because looking at what we can do now versus what we started with back then is really quite amazing. When I became a cook, I thought I'd just spend the rest of my life in a kitchen and I was going to die in a kitchen. Now, if you're a pastry chef today, you can develop your own brand, you can become your own producer, you can become your own content producer, you can sell yourself on the internet and make money that way. If you specialize in a certain discipline, you can become a consultant for other organizations that are having difficulty. And we heard the previous two speakers, and they have really interesting backgrounds in nutritional desserts, and they offer solutions to other people. In California, I do a lot of cannabis edible consulting. Not my favorite to do, but the good news is they forget everything, so I can keep charging them. It's very, very true. I complain to my wife about this all the time. I hate working with them, but I just keep charging them. They forget everything. They forget everything. They don't even know what a spatula is. They have no food background, but I'm still needed there, to help them. They're terrible people to work for. But, I started my career with a twin beam balance scale, and we look at it and go, is that 5 grams of baking soda? Now everything is digital. We used to use secometers to measure sugar density. You don't even have that anymore. You have handheld refractometers. So there really is not a better time to be a pastry chef than right here and right now. And I do believe that I feel lucky to have survived 35 years so I can see all these changes. And now I got about 40 years in the business if you count washing dishes since I was 16. I'm 55 years old now. I'm going to be opening 2 brands this year. So I think I have about 15 years left, and then I want to kind of retire and call it a life and maybe hand the business over to somebody else. But there is this sense of urgency now to do my own thing, and that's what I plan on doing. But I'm going to get back to talking about food insecurity because I think that is kind of a position that I have felt very strongly about for several years, and hearing Johanna and Charles discuss where nutrition is in this world, it is very true. And I mentioned to her after the last seminar, after the last speaker, the group panel, I should say, that if you walk through a grocery store, you only see nutritional items on the very edges of the grocery store, at least in the USA. That's where you may find your proteins, your chicken, pork, beef, and fish, and then your fruits and veggies. Everything else in the aisles, carbohydrates and processed goods, high sodium goods. And those are the things that are really, really bad for you. And one thing that I've learned is that if you're going to be in this business for a long time, your body is your business. Your body is your business. And learning how to control what you put into your body is going to determine how long you last in this industry. And one of the interesting things about how I came into the business, and I said earlier, I never really loved food. I wasn't in love with food. I loved making it, but I never ate it. I never ate any of my desserts. I would make thousands of them over and over again, and I never ate one of them. And I think that became common knowledge on my Instagram following. And I used to do question and answer segments many years ago on Instagram. And somebody asked me, why don't you eat any of your desserts? And I plainly replied, because I was tired of kind of making excuses for it. And I plainly replied, it's because I've had an eating disorder for years and I don't feel comfortable eating. And somebody, a young pastry chef in Canada, she messaged me and she said, oh my God, I thought I was the only one. I said, I guarantee you're not, that we all have something going on up inside our head that's troubling us. And that was something that I lived with for a very long time, that I was so weird about food that I couldn't eat it. And how it happened through a PTSD response that I'll never forget, because I traced it back to 1994. I was eating a piece of pizza, and I couldn't swallow it. And I gagged it back up. And then my dog, who was supposed to come to my rescue, grabbed the pizza out of my hands, and she ate it without even chewing it, which was pretty embarrassing. But you think of Lassie saving lives? I was hoping that the dog would jump on my chest and push it out of me, but she didn't do it. She had her own interest in mind. So from that moment on, I had trouble swallowing food. So food became to me as if I had a tack in my shoe. You would never want to put a shoe on if walking was painful every time you put your shoes on. And so for me, I could never eat the food that I was serving. I never even felt comfortable being around it. And it was something that bothered me my entire career. Last year, I was asked to do an event like this in the States, and they asked me what was my funniest moment, what was the funniest memory I have of working in a kitchen. And I answered very plainly. I said, I can't think of one, because I never enjoyed it. To me, it was always about business. It was always about performing. It was always about work. And then the pandemic happened, and that was a life changer, and probably a lifesaver, even though it was bad for a lot of people. I had an ex-girlfriend die. I had a very good friend pass away. I had a colleague pass away of COVID. And I thought, I need to change who I was. And I couldn't date anybody because I couldn't feel exposed for being weird around food. Because what do you do when you date somebody? You take them out to eat, right? Or you have them over to eat. Well, luckily the pandemic happened, and I never even learned how to cook. I never cooked ever. I never turned my oven on. I didn't even have any pots or pans. I never cooked. I would have to eat soft food. I would eat yogurt. I would eat hummus, tzatziki. I still kind of eat like that every day too, by the way. But I did work with a therapist to help me feel less weird about food. And it wasn't really until that time, till about 2020, that I ever ate butter, that I ever ate cheese, that I ever ate bread. It was the first time I ate pizza probably since 2011 when I was in Italy once. I had pizza one time. And so that was the moment that I realized that I needed to change, that I needed to be less weird around the food. And that's when I began to enjoy food. That's when I began to enjoy sharing food. I learned to cook. I learned to be able to feel okay with who I was when it came to eating. And then I started thinking about what food insecurity means to certain people and how it is a real thing. And as chefs, we're allowed to work with somebody else's money and buy very expensive food and sometimes make mistakes with the food. And sometimes it goes in the trash. And that's unfortunate, but it does happen. And I remembered working, years ago, I worked for a great chef, guy called Joel Robuchon. I hope some of you have heard of who he was. I can't call him Joel, though. I never called him chef even. It was always Mr. Robuchon. But Mr. Robuchon, he went to school to become a priest. But because his family struggled with food insecurity after the war in France, World War II, that is. He wasn't that old, World War II. He was urged to go pick up a trade, so he became a dishwasher, and then he became a chef. And he'd walk around the kitchen, and he would say to my colleagues, not the pastry colleagues, but the colleagues that worked the savory side, he would say, "That animal gave up its life for our guests tonight. Your cooking better be worth that animal's life." And that always stuck with me too. So Mr. Robuchon knew a lot about food insecurity too. So we're lucky that we get to work with the food we do. We get to work with rare foods that we do. We're now experiencing this high cost of chocolate. I'm opening a chocolate concept this year. What a terrible time to open it with the cost of chocolate being high. But think about the people that are picking the cacao beans that have no idea who I am. And in a lot of cases, the people who are picking our cacao beans that become chocolate have never tasted chocolate itself. That's very true too. So taking Mr. Robuchon's philosophy and transitioning it to what I do, out of respect for the people that are growing the cacao and picking the cacao and the water that it takes to grow the cacao, I too, my goal is to use the chocolate as respectfully as I can and to use every drop of it. Just out of respect for those people that are picking it, that have no idea what we're doing with it. And that goes to everything that we use. And I was saying to my wife earlier when we had lunch, there's an abundance of food out here, and we're talking about protecting food and not wasting food and recycling food or upcycling food. The irony of that is there's still going to be a lot of food that gets wasted out there. So hopefully that can be donated or put to a good use along the way. But it is something now that I'm becoming a business owner that I'm more and more aware of. And serving dessert shouldn't be a guilty pleasure, and eating shouldn't be a traumatic experience. But for a lot of us, it still is. And the irony of working in food while having trouble being around food, it never really escaped me. But I never had to tell anybody either. I just had to live with it. But it cornered me into a position where I had to deal with it. And then also, I think the importance of sharing that with you and with others is so if it does trouble you or you see it troubling somebody else, you can share the experience that I am sharing with you and perhaps help somebody down the line. And it's not just about feeding them, it's about making them feel okay to eat and okay to be around food. Because I don't know if it is for everybody. I think we all get into food for different reasons. I think, as I said before, for my family, I think it was pure survival. And it was a decent living. It wasn't a great living. It takes a long time to make any money in this business. I think we all know that, unfortunately. But it does come along with some exciting things. And, I got to travel to Ireland and be able to have this conversation with you. And I've been able to teach masterclasses around the world and help others become better chocolatiers and better pastry chefs. And also, it's led me from having a great mentor for me to give that back to others to become great mentors to them, too. So my advice to everybody in this business is tell you to find a mentor and then become a mentor. I think that's very important. That sometimes chefs forget that we learned from others and we don't give it back. And as I see my career dwindling down, it's important for me to keep pushing to get the next generation to take the reins and really elevate food around the world. And I know Ireland is one of these places that, I've been told is struggling with that too, to really kind of change their ways and get stronger in pastry. And here we are having this competition. I can't wait to see what these young people are doing, because those are going to be the people that in 5 or 10 years, we hope to see their name on TV shows or wearing medals around their neck, or maybe we'll see them in France in 2 years at the championship. So be a mentor. I'm sorry, if you had a mentor, please return that favor and become a mentor, and know that we all get into this business for different reasons. I was hoping this would become more of a Q&A so we could have a better conversation about this. But we're going to have a panel a little bit later on, are we?
No.
We're not?
I don't think so.
I think we should. We should do it right now.
Well, does anyone have any questions for Kriss now?
And I could tell more celebrity stories. I just made you all feel terrible. I'll tell some funny celebrity stories. You want to hear about Robert Downey Jr.?
Yes.
He's a good dude. He's a good dude. I can tell you that. But does anybody have any questions before I tell a Robert Downey Jr. story? Yes.
In your experience, how do you get to make a good relationship with your staff to be open to have these uncomfortable conversations? I don't think everyone is just where you're at the moment, where you can publicly speak about that. And sometimes kitchens are not necessarily the safest places.
100%. Because when I started in the early 1990s, the guys who worked next to me fought in Vietnam. And my dishwasher fought in World War II. And then my other dishwashers were POWs in Vietnam. The guy spent 13 years as a POW in Vietnam. So I wasn't complaining to them. I had to suck it up. And then when you internalize those things, they come out. They come out in things like eating disorders. So how do you approach your staff about it? You don't. But what it did teach me, though, is to be a little bit more gentle with everybody, because I was always so focused on the task at hand that I didn't really care for them as humans because I had to get the job done. And once I learned to feel better about myself, I was able to feel better about other people too, and I could be more empathetic towards them. And when I started teaching masterclasses around the globe, they would see my expertise on the internet, but they don't see all my failures either, right? Nobody puts their shitty work on the internet. They just put their good work on the internet. It's almost like a filter, okay? And so when I would do these masterclasses, people would come up to the chocolate machine, and you could see how tense they were. I was pushing them into their fear zone. It was a place that they didn't want to go. And I understood that, because those were places I didn't want to go either. But I knew that, and I would tell them that it's okay. The ingredients don't know who's working with them. The ingredients don't know if it's an experienced chef working with them or an inexperienced chef working with them. So I have to do the same thing that they have to do. So as I recognized what their fear zone was, I was able to treat my employees a little bit more gently and take a little bit more time to explain what they had to do. And then if they wanted to open up to me, they could. And they could always talk to me and knock on my door or pull me aside or have a separate conversation. But I learned also to read their body language too. That was the other thing too. If they were struggling with something, I would take them aside and say, hey, what's going on? If they wanted to talk to me, they could talk to me. And I did have very strong relationships with my employees, though. And some of my employees have worked with me since 2013. So that's a very long time to have relationships with employees, for sure. Any other questions before I talk about Robert Downey? Anybody? Yeah.
How you doing, Chris? How are you?
I'm well.
Two questions for you, Chris. How often in your career have you seen like changes in pastry? Is it every 3 years, 5 years, 7 years? What way has the cycle worked for you?
Hold on to your second question, because that's a good question. Well, I've been in it so long, I've seen, it's like the fashion trends. You know, if you hang on to your bell bottoms long enough, they come back into fashion. They're back in fashion. I'm seeing more and more bell bottoms, right? Now we're seeing tiramisu come back around. I want to kill myself. In 1993, every menu had to have creme brulee, tiramisu, and a chocolate cake with a runny center. I was trying to be the first chef to create one dessert out of 3 items. I wanted to have a tiramisu creme brulee with a runny center. Just get it out of the way. But I can tell you, I learned to make lemon tart 35 years ago. I don't make the same lemon tart that I did 35 years ago. So I've changed that. So we don't invent new ingredients. We just like, if you play a musical instrument, nobody invents new notes. They just rearrange them. Pastry's kind of the same way. Pastry's the same way of playing a musical instrument. It can sound terrible at times. But it's already figured out for you. Somebody already figured out how to play piano and guitar and saxophone. So all you have to do is learn it. It's the same thing with pastry. So it's just about rearranging the notes to get new flavors. So I love this as I get older. I feel like the French chefs that taught me, and I noticed as they got older, all they wanted to make was the stuff they grew up eating, the stuff that their mom made them, macaroni and cheese or cassoulet. They won their Michelin stars. They were done cooking that crap. I'm done cooking that crap out of my ego too. I just want to coat chocolate all day, let my bank account grow, call it a life and retire in Spain. That's the whole goal. We're going to save cats. That's what we're going to do. But I find myself going back. If you look at my Instagram over the past few weeks, all I'm making over and over again is pâte à choux. That's what I'm doing. I spent the last 6 weeks just making pâte à choux, different temperatures, different hydrations, different flours. So how often does it come around? I don't think it ever goes away. I just think it changes shape and form. It becomes more precise. I think we've learned a lot about silicone molds and 3D printing, so we have all these new shapes and things like that. So I don't know if it really changes the technique. That never really changes, but it kind of changes the shape. So I think you see, I think if you look now, I can't wait for this tiramisu craze to get over. I really can't, because it's bringing me back bad memories. And your next one?
Yes, my second question is, since COVID, there's been a lot of changes in kitchens. Have you any advice on mental health in terms of, the way pastry chefs approach modern techniques and going forward in the future for working in the pastry kitchen?
Yeah, I think what happened with COVID, the chefs during COVID around the world found out how rickety the industry is. They all got tossed out to the curb. And I think they said, F you, I'm not going back to work. I think a lot of the super talented pastry chefs became entrepreneurs. That's what I've seen. I wouldn't go back to a hotel either. And I wasn't working at a hotel during COVID, but there's no way I would go back to working in a hotel. There's no way I would do it. So I think what happened was what I've seen in the USA, a lot of the top pastry chefs became entrepreneurs. They started out as a side hustle to make money during COVID, did these little pop-ups, sold their goods on Instagram and TikTok, started brick and mortars. So COVID was great for entrepreneurship, but it sucked all the talent out of the hotels. And the people that went back to work for a higher wage. It was the first time in the history of labor that the employee had the upper hand on the employer. And they asked for more money to go back. And then we got this inflation situation all over the world. It just wasn't an American thing. It was all over the world. And then for the people that didn't go back to work, it affected the people who did go back to work because they became super stressed because the customer dynamic has never changed. It's never changed and it never will change. As much as we want to change the industry and have a better experience with our own mental health, our own physical health that becomes affected by working 18 hours a day, it's never going to change because of the customer demand. They still want to eat dessert at 11 p.m. You're the last one there. Nobody eats dessert at 3 in the afternoon. I tried it. I tried dating civilians. They say, you working Friday? Yeah, every Friday. What about Saturday? Yeah, Saturday too. Christmas? Yeah. And believe me, growing up, I hated my family. They were terrible people. When somebody said, join the industry, you'll never have to see them again because you'll be working every Christmas, Christmas Eve, New Year's Day, Easter, Mother's Day. I said, really? I'll never have to see my family again? Sign me up. Oh, it was great. It was a built-in excuse never to see him. But then, your life changes. You get married. You have a cat or two. You might have a baby. That's where it gets the stress of my work needs to be done to provide for my family, but my family needs me too. So how do you do that? It's never going to change until the customer changes. And they're not changing anytime soon, unfortunately. Anything else before I talk about Robert? Anybody? I got lots to talk about. I can be here all day. Oh, okay. Well, here's interesting about him. He's a vegan now, right? He didn't eat one vegetable when I was cooking for him. Not one. He's allergic to chocolate, which was shocking to me because, you come from the French background. You want to serve chocolate in every course, right? So he couldn't have black or milk chocolate. He could have white chocolate, but he was eating low fat. But it was really a great situation because he wanted to eat later, so I kind of rethink about how I serve dessert. So I had to think more fruit forward, but how would I do that? So I wanted a lot of acidic notes and spicy notes. So one of my favorite desserts that I created for him was a calamansi sorbet with raw pineapple, coriander, and vanilla. And that was just so simple and so clean and just kind of easy for someone to eat and kind of cleanse their palate and then move on without putting in a food coma, which became kind of how I went on from that. So really changing how I cooked for President Clinton was a pivotal point for me because it changed how I cooked for everybody. And for those who don't know what a calamansi is, it's a lime from the Philippines that has these notes of like grapefruit and tangerine, but it's really acidic and very, very refreshing too. And Filipinos drink it in a beverage. But I made sorbet out of it. I thought it was great. So, but yeah, that was a life-changing moment. So, but yeah, he didn't eat a vegetable, Bubba, and now he's a vegan. I find that very, very funny. Anybody else? Any other questions? Yes, ma'am? That's a good question. I used to get asked that all the time. Here's how I got good at it. I hope I was good at it. And I would reply to when people would ask me, how do you know what your food tastes like if you've never tasted it? I said, well, does a cardiac surgeon have to have a heart attack in order to fix somebody? No, he's just trained. So I'm just trained. I figured I was just trained, and I kind of saw everything in my mind's eye and through sense memory. I have a very good sense memory. When I smell something, it brings me back to where I was maybe 30 years ago. If I taste something, it brings me back to something I tasted many, many years ago. So I just kind of did it from there. And really, nature, my philosophy on food is just to follow nature. And the things that grow near each other tend to taste good with each other. So, if you think about the things that grow in orchards, pears and apples and walnuts. Do you have maple trees in Ireland? No, you don't. I think that's a North American thing only. But those things taste really great with maple syrup, and they kind of grow together. They're kind of different seasons, but they grow together, so it makes sense that they would taste good together. So that's basically how I put things together. I just did it through sense memory, and I saw everything through my mind's eye. So that's a good question, though. Anybody else? Yep. I appreciate this because it's easier for me to have a conversation than it is to have a speech. What advice do I have for new people in the industry? Make yourself indispensable. Yeah, make yourself indispensable. If you're not scheduled on Friday or Saturday, it means you're not doing very well. Yeah. You want to make yourself indispensable to your chef. Do everything. Do every job. Do every job it takes. Just be present when your chef needs you, and always promise yourself that you'll improve with every task that you do. I used to watch the clock, and I would say, let me see if I can do this 30 seconds faster, and then 30 more seconds faster. And how much better can I do this? And how much more level can I get the cake batter when I put it in the tray? So really challenge yourself to get better. And I would always break up the year in quarters and say, am I better in April than I was at the end of February? And then I would say, am I better in June than I was at the beginning of April? So kind of look at your growth that way, and really just continue to eat up information. It's all on the internet, and just put it into your head. And if you can, I advise anybody to eat as much ethnic food as you possibly can. I think that's very interesting. And get the travel bug. And if you have a fear of flying, get over it. Because you cannot, I'm embarrassed to say this, but I would say all of my pastry cooks have never been to Europe. And I thought I have even Lauren, my longtime sous chef, she's making croissants now somewhere at a bakery in Los Angeles. How can you make a croissant if you've never tasted how the French make a croissant? If you've never tasted how the Austrians make a croissant? You have to go there how could you be a sushi chef if you've never given yourself to a Japanese chef? My brother gave me a great piece of advice, my brother Mark. He said to me, if you want to be good at something, go find the person that's great at it and throw yourself at their feet. And that's what I did. I found a great ice cream maker. I found a great chocolatier. I found a great MOF and sugar candy. And that's been great advice, and that's great advice that I would give to anybody. Anything else? What? Who said that? Who asked about Gwyneth? Wait, who wants to hear about Gwyneth? You all do? Okay. So I was at Robert Downey Jr.'s birthday party, okay? And everybody was there. I got a phone call, by the way. I guess I could play it. From Robert, if you want to hear it. No, maybe.
Yeah, go for it.
No, it's too long. We'll play it later. You want to hear it?
Yeah.
Okay, so I was on a group phone call with Robert, and I had two phones, so I had to record it because nobody would believe me. I've never played it for anybody. Not even my wife believed me. But I dug it up the other day. But anyway, so I went to Robert's. We did desserts for Robert Downey Jr.'s birthday party. He was turning 50 in 2016. He had everybody at the party. Everybody. He took everybody's phone, too, except for mine. He didn't frisk me, but he was a very, very nice guy. He came to the hotel. We did a tasting. He tasted one thing. He dropped his fork, and he goes, "Whoa, dude, you're good." And then we stepped aside. We had about a 20-minute conversation about things. And then I saw him at his party. He had Duran Duran play. He had Steely Dan play. I asked him how much it cost. He said, Kriss, you only turn 50 once. My 50th birthday party was by myself. It was in 2020, so it wasn't very good. But Gwyneth was at that party. Gwyneth came up to me, and I had a cook with me by my side. We had all the desserts out on the table. It wasn't a buffet, but we actually plated the desserts on a marble tabletop that was about 42 inches high. I'd say right about here. And we put all the sauces down, and we put all the espumas down, and all the mousse cakes, and all the millefeuille, and everything down. And he had about 250 guests, and they all attacked it at once. Gwyneth has a piece of cake on her fork, and she said, I don't want this anymore. What should I do with it? And I didn't have an answer for her. So my assistant, his name was Margarito, he said, you could just put the fork down. And that's what she did. She just dropped it awkwardly and walked away. So 2 months later, there's another big birthday party happening behind the restaurant. So to kind of give you some background, I worked 5 years for Jose Andres. We had a restaurant called The Bazaar in Beverly Hills. And you would have dinner in one dining room, tapas in another one. They would move you. You would start with a cocktail, and then you'd move around, and you have your tapas here, your dinner there. And they'd move you into another room to have dessert with me. It was great. I had a captive audience. And they'd come up, and they'd pick out their dessert, and magically it would appear in front of them. But behind that restaurant, we had a restaurant called Sam, S-A-A-M. And it was only open 3 nights a week. But on this particular Saturday night, it was bought out by Rob Lowe. And he had with him Oprah Winfrey, Barbara Streisand. It's pretty good, right? If Al-Qaeda wanted to hit the restaurant at that moment and take out all the money in Hollywood, they could have done it that night. Oprah Winfrey, Barbara Streisand, Ellen DeGeneres, her wife, Portia de Rossi, David Duchovny, and Gwyneth Paltrow. Now, I made raw vegan desserts for that night for Ellen DeGeneres and Portia de Rossi. And I made dairy desserts for everybody else. And I was told that Gwyneth was also a raw vegan, so she was getting the raw vegan dessert too. Well, she saw what Oprah was having, and she gave that up in between cigarette breaks to have the dairy-based dessert. Now, she sells a lifestyle called Goop. You all familiar with that? I don't think she actually believes in it. I think she believes in the cash, but not the philosophy of Goop itself. So that's why she has that reputation. Not just with me. Other people in LA know that she's a weirdo as well. So that's the... Everybody else has been great. I've been blessed to work with some really amazing celebrities, and that really is the best part about working as a pastry chef in Los Angeles is the opportunity to do some of the things that you get to do is you couldn't do it even in New York City, I don't think. I don't think I would have ever had the opportunity if I was working in Chicago or Las Vegas or New York City to really meet the people that I kind of respected and admired in other industries. Hell, one time I got to see a movie with the guy who directed it. I got to see The French Connection with William Friedkin. Do you know who he was? Wow. He directed The Exorcist. Mm-hmm. Now, where else could you do that? Could you do that in Dublin? No, you couldn't, right? But Dublin's great for other things, though. Is there any more? Before I wrap up? Yes?
How would you yourself, or maybe your employees, what would you suggest? How would you deal with the burnouts? How do you avoid them if it's possible?
Yeah, that's tough, right? So I think what's worked for me is become very regimented in your routine and make sure you take care of yourself first and foremost. I mean, I basically get up at the same time every day, and I make sure I get my workout in. I make sure I get my protein in. And that was one of the things that was lacking when I was essentially anorexic for 30 years, was I was lacking all the proper macros and hydration. And that was something that I started writing down and keeping track of. Was making sure I got enough protein and water throughout the day. It's difficult when you travel. I do a lot of traveling, but I do when I'm at home. If you watch me eat, about 90% of the time I eat the same thing every day, so I can guarantee the amount of protein and limit the amount of sugars in my system. I think also being inspired by other things outside of the food industry. Like I'm inspired by other pastry chefs. I'm a huge fan of other pastry chefs and chocolate makers. I have the La Maison du Chocolat logo tattooed on my arm because I met Robert Links 30 some odd years ago. But I think finding time to be with your loved one at the holidays, if you can, to go to concerts, to go to movies, to taking that time just to kind of reward yourself, that will keep you creative in the kitchen. It'll prevent those burnouts. And the other thing that I like to do if I ever feel any kind of burnout where I can't finish a creation is I really challenge myself to work with ingredients that are completely unfamiliar to me. You know, certain flavors that I've never worked with before. You know, and try to work tomato into a dessert or fennel into a dessert, or work with a spice that I'm unfamiliar with, and not really focus on just kind of recycling hazelnut, almond, coconut, passion fruit, to kind of reach deep into fruits and spend a little bit more time fabricating and becoming more of a craftsperson and having and creating that balance, because that has been very elusive for me in my career and for most chefs because of that customer demand. It's the irony that we're taking care of other people, but we're far from taking care of ourselves. So now I definitely have more balance. And I was talking to someone earlier how when I mentioned the body of your business, if you had a vehicle that was your business, you only have so much fuel for a day. You'd go do your tasks in the most efficient manner, and your body only has so much energy per day. So take care of those things in the most efficient manner. There used to be this woman on on Instagram I used to follow. I don't anymore. She was a chef in Seattle, and she used to brag, complain about all the hours she put in every day. And that made me realize that she is a terrible business person. If she really is working 20 hours a day, she is wasting many hours. She could get that same work done in much less time and then have a better balance on her life. So knowing that your body is your business, just balance it out the best that you possibly can. And maybe lean on delegating to your employees a little bit better, too. That's something I've had to learn to do to become a better communicator, to do that. Anything else?
I think I'm going to bring it to a close.
Okay, because I've gone way over.
No, you haven't gone much over, but we want to let everybody have a break before Marika starts. But please give Kriss a massive round of applause.
Thanks.